Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. You can see the
Wonderful.
screen. Yes, sir.
Wonderful. So, as Principal Sir said, he started in 1991, where the punched cards were punch cards and magnetic tapes of big sizes used to be there, and doing programming those days were very, very difficult, because I also used punch cards, and I used to get my time slot only once per week on Saturday. And I used to get only 1 hour with the computer, because computers were so expensive those days. And if you make one small mistake in the punched card, you had to wait for 1 more week. And in that 1 more week, you have to do the punch cards again, which normally used to take, for a simple program, it used to take 3 to 4 hours of punching the cards alone. It is like the bus conductor, punching the ticket on 4 corners. If you would have seen in the 10 or 15 years back, here it is like you have a big A3 size paper, where you have to punch the cards everywhere. So those were the days, for we assumed, even writing a simple program, used to take hours. Today, millions and millions of lines of programs can be downloaded from the website and then can be executed in a matter of hours. So all these things we have gone through. Maybe I have too much of baggage here with 3 decades of experience in the IT industry, but I thought all this experience should count in finding out, what exactly we went through in this industry, and extending that line, what are all the things that are coming into the future and how we can get ourselves prepared for it. So everything in computer starts with data. So that's the reason, in every presentation, I always start with the data, because data becomes the backbone of every organization, every computer professional. And, when you talk about the data, the first thing, for the smallest matter, because I started using the word called matter, because my affinity towards physics. So the first matter, that comes onto Earth for IT industry is bit. Bit is nothing but 0 or 1, and from set of bits form a byte, and set of bytes, when it is processed, becomes an information or data. And when you process both data and information, you will have more and more data, and then you have to store that somewhere, and that is what is called your data storage. And you also need to have a set of programs. Whenever you are storing something onto the computer storage, you also need set of programs to access it. So set of data storage and programs is what is called a database management system. So this is how database management system evolved. But a lot of people don't know what evolved from DBMS later on. So I want to extend that line and then say how it is taking us into the future. So once you have the database, then you can prepare set of reports that your organization or that your superiors want. That becomes your metrics and data analysis. And once you have all that metrics and data analysis available in multiple places, you can go mine that data and then make it useful for you, for your department, and for your organization. That is what is called analysis of raw data and extracting useful information from it. That is called data mining. People use multiple data stores to do the data mining and then get some useful data out of it, rather than the raw data playing the role till the DBMS era. So then once you have the useful data available, that data can be integrated with your business, and you can make it even more intelligent, not just for the analysis of the data alone and the perspective of the data alone, but also you can make it useful for your business. That is what is called business intelligence. In business intelligence era, the data became more intelligent than what was available in the data mining days. And with intelligent data and business intelligence being available, then by looking at all the things that happened from the DBMS world to the data analysis world to the data mining world, you can convert them into the whole experience can be converted into variables, operators, equations, statistics, and formulas. Majority of them not only use mathematics, but also physics, and you derive a model out of it. Okay, so once you put that model and you have an intelligent data, okay, and then you associate set of methods, processes, and algorithms to it, it becomes data science. This is exactly what is the course that is being offered everywhere in colleges, saying data science. But the birth of data science is not overnight. The birth of data science evolved over a period of 40 years, where bit started playing its game in the IT industry. So this is how data science evolved. And once you have them, once you have the data science, and once you have the model which is deriving the data and then getting you more intelligence, okay, that is called artificial intelligence. That is not something that is coming out of the programs. That's why it is called artificial intelligence. And the way you are getting it is by having an intelligent data where you are converting the data into a model and applying that model for different methods and processes and algorithms where you can give different outcomes based on the situation, which is not actually programmed, but that is coming, mainly out of the data by associating, physics and mathematics to it. That is what is called artificial intelligence. Once you have the artificial intelligence, does anyone know what is the exact opposite of artificial intelligence that is available in plenty in this world? If you take the literal opposite, the literal opposite for artificial intelligence is natural stupidity. So if we depend on only the erroneous programs, if we depend only on the inefficiencies that are available in the environment, actually we would not have reached the world of artificial intelligence. Because if you really see, for us, artificial intelligence as a subject has been there for close to 30 years, but it started becoming famous only after the data science became available. The reason is, till then, whatever data we were feeding in and whatever information, equations, and formula models, whatever we were feeding into the computer were developed by the humans. Where to err is human. And because of that, artificial intelligence took a long time to evolve. So with artificial intelligence being available, now, so the next topic which is gaining a lot of attention is machine learning. So once you have that intelligence available with the programs, with the methods, processes, and algorithms in the environment, we can also make the computer to learn from them, learn from the algorithms and models, and those machines, what you call as computers, can automatically predict the outcome with repeated users and with a lot of history associated with it, which is also stored as a data storage or metadata in some other place. So machine learning makes use of the different data storage. It makes use of different reports. It makes use of data mining that not only comes from a particular database, but from set of databases which are called data lakes. And by applying, the metadata tools like MapR and other tools, you get those predictions available by the machine. It will contact multiple databases. It will contact multiple algorithms that are available, and then automatically predict the outcome. So that is what is called machine learning. And machine learning today, what is available today, is taking us to the next era, which is called deep learning, which is going to use artificial neural networks. This subject again comes very close to physics. To give an example of artificial neural network is a simple study that happened several years back, where a person actually took a stone and threw it on a dog. Even though it hit its backside of its head, actually the dog started limping one of its leg, and then it started running with 3 legs. So you would have seen this. Dog, wherever it gets hit, it will lift one of its leg, and then it will run away. The reason is very, very simple, because whichever part the dog gets hit, there is one vein which gets electrified. Okay, and that actually immediately prompts one of the legs to be lifted up, and then it runs. So this is based on a theory which is artificial neural network. And so what you need to do is you have to just pass a small amount of electricity to that vein, and then automatically the dog will start limping, even without hitting the dog. So this study actually became the basis for deep learning, where just assume instead of a vein on the dog, if a wire in the computer can be manipulated like that, or a vein in the human body can be manipulated like that to make your brain operate. That is exactly the basis for the neural network, which includes both mathematics, because the amount of electricity you send to the vein depends on the situation. So that is also a formula, that has to be, calculated based on your physics and mathematical principles. So this is how, in the last 30 years, the data has evolved. Any doubts on this, please? Okay, so let me move on to the next slide, which is evolving nature of IT from the multiple dimensions, whether it is a physical medium or with respect to the languages, with respect to the development lifecycle models, or with respect to the architecture in terms of what kind of architecture it is, and in terms of how many tiers you have for making your entire stack available, and also the delivery model by which these services are delivered or these applications are delivered. So I'm going to talk about each one of them. If you consider each column, you can call them as attributes, and if in the database world, if you consider each row, they can be called as tuples. So I'm going to talk about all the attributes first, and then we can we can talk about the tuples to see how we moved from 80s to 90s to 2000s today. So with respect to the physical medium, those days what we had was something called desktops, or they were called mini computers, where it used to take the space of almost 10 by 10 feet of space in a particular room, where these desktops were installed, and then we had to go there. Normally, what happens, even if it is an AC room, it used to generate a lot of heat. It becomes very hot soon. So those were the days, the desktops ruled the world with huge space being occupied, with processing power not even 100th or 1000th of what we have today. And there came the laptops, where the laptops were still heavy, like what you see as desktops today. It used to weigh about 5 kgs or 6 kgs. Nowadays, it became 1/5 of that weight. And after that, laptops became popular, and after that, we got mobile into the era. So we with respect to the physical medium, what we have today is mobile, and that's how we access all our services with. Then with respect to the languages, when I started my career in 1983, the language that was very popular was I did in 1983. I did BSc in computer science. The whole of Trichy used to have only 2 computers, and one of them was with REC Trichy. So so to go there and then do the program, so it used to take a lot of time. So what we used to do is we used to write all the basic programs in flowchart first. We create the flowchart, then we validate the flowchart, then we write the program on sheet of paper, we validate the program, then only we translate that into punched cards, because punched card was very expensive. Every time you make a mistake, you had to spend about 5 rupees those days for the punched card, which was a big amount if you look at in 80s. So the first set of languages which came are called first generation language, which are basically your programming languages such as BASIC, COBOL, and Fortran. Then when the laptops became popular, the second generation language became more popular, and they were structured languages like C, and also towards the end of the second generation language, you also started getting C++ as an object-oriented language. So then during the PAMTOPS world, what happened was, fourth generation language started coming in, which are your object-oriented languages, plus, the new languages that are coming in. And in the mobile era, we have a RAD kind of languages which are being available, which are both structured as well as object-oriented. So with respect to software development lifecycle, software development lifecycle gives you the process by in which you develop the software from beginning to end, using the different phases in the lifecycle, which are typically, your requirements phase, architecture phase, design phase, development phase, testing phase, and delivery phase. So, by what is a process that you are following to take the whole program, to take the whole product through all these phases is defined in the software development lifecycle, so that you can create error-free software by following these processes. So those days, when desktops were the only means of computers, waterfall model was the model that was used, where you cannot start your design unless otherwise the architecture is over. You cannot do your coding unless otherwise your complete design, both your high level design as well as your low level designs are completed. So that was actually what was called waterfall model. And typically using a waterfall model, if you have to get a product out of your company and to deliver to the customer, it used to take 2 years. So you can go and see in the website, those days, big companies like IBM, HPs were the only companies involved in the software development and product development, and they used to deliver their software, once in 2 years. Even the operating system companies like Microsoft used to name their product based on the year, saying Windows 95. Windows 95 means it was the Windows version which was created in 95. So they very well knew that in the same year of 95, they're not going to release one more operating system. That's how they named it like that, saying Windows 95. Okay, so those days, it used to take years to get the product out. However, if you see in the mobile world today, I get my mobile application update almost on every day. So, the product life cycle, for the software development life cycle have changed tremendously, which is enabling you to cut short the time, as well as by introducing the lean process by which you can deliver the software error-free. So after waterfall model, what came is incremental model, where both testing and development used to happen in parallel. It was also called V model. And then during the PAMDOS days, the spiral model became popular, where customers can give the requirements at any time, and we used to deliver the product based on those set of requirements that we call it as a release. So the spiral model became popular. Then what we have today is an agile model. Agile model is nothing but incremental model, where you can deliver the software almost daily as and when it gets ready. And what you use here is, you don't use all the requirements together, but whatever that can be delivered quickly, you take those requirements and deliver them at periodical levels, so every week or every day or every month, that is decided by the organization, and then we deliver the products using the agile model today. Agile model also talks about, better teamwork and better coordination, so that all the delays and errors can be avoided. So this is on the SDLC evolution that happened in the last 30 years. And when it comes to the structure, in terms of the architectural structure, those days, whatever software we used to develop used to have only one thing called a program, which gets normally stored in a floppy. And if at all any customer, there was no networking those days. Like Shamla Madam started with one of the big thing that happened to the IT industry was internet. So those days, no internet, so every software was hand delivered. And the way it was hand delivered is either through a magnetic tape or a cartridge tape or through floppies, so, and your program gets stored. Your program in a object language, gets delivered in a floppy to the customers. So it was using an unstructured program where the customers won't even know what language it was used inside, but what the customer gets was only the binary, one big executable, which that person executes and get the work done. And during the laptop days, what happened was, when I say during the laptop days, it was a coexistence between laptops and desktops. So, during this time, what happened is the procedural languages started coming into the picture, where you have C language and things like that. But but still there was no internet those days, and even those things were delivered as one big chunk of program, that gets delivered to the customer. So I have personally myself traveled, in multiple places to implement these software. And there came, networking, then, structured, programming started taking place. Then we got into, object-oriented programming languages, and that became popular, and it keeps moving. Today we have, a lot better in object-oriented languages and the interfaces that are being available in the architecture today. And coming to the number of tiers a particular application uses, or the particular application, depends on, those days, you buy a computer with an operating system, and what you need is only the software that comes from a vendor, and you install the software and run it. There were no other complexities or tiers involved. It was only one computer where you go and implement it in a single tier and then execute your programs. And after internet became popular, after networking became popular, not internet, after networking became popular, the client server architecture became popular, where you install a software on the client and you install other software on the server, and they communicate with each other using a technology called local area network. And they used to communicate with each other, but not with the entire world. That was during the LAN days. Then internet became popular, and which connected computers not only inside a particular office, but also outside, wherein which we were able to put the software that we are running on the client and server to the multiple places with the machines that were available all across the world. So internet actually took our program beyond the client server architecture. Then today we have a service-oriented architecture where a particular program is split into thousands and millions, and these programs can be run on multiple places, and all those outputs and outcomes can be gathered and then presented on one single screen. So service-oriented architecture helps you to combine all the small, tiny programs that are running in multiple computers into one useful application. Then coming into the delivery model, okay, those days we used to implement the software completely by ourselves. So if you see the softwares that were coming from Microsoft or HP or IBM those days, they were completely developed by them from starting to end. So it was completely implemented for a particular customer rather than for a set of customers. So that's what the implement means in the delivery model. So those days, things, the customers have to pay the entire amount, and then that amount is used to develop a product only for that specific customer. This is what is called implemental model of delivery, and that's what we used to have. So, and all the companies those days were working for a specific customer or set of customers. So that was the delivery model those days. Then off-the-shelf kind of products came into the picture. They used to call it as product boxes. Majority of the customers in US used to call it as red box. So where the box with the set of floppies will be delivered as a product to the customer. So Windows those days used to come in a box where a set of floppies would be there, and then which you can insert it into your floppy drive and install it. And today we download the software from the website, but those days it used to come in the floppy drives. So the off-the-shelf products became popular then. Then the hosted applications became popular. The CRM kind of products, came on the hosted environment, where if you have a good internet, you don't have to install anything onto your computer, but they will provide you a particular URL. You access that URL, it will get you into an application. Then you can start using that application. So that was what is called a hosted delivery, where the hosting is done basically for a set of customers, not for the entire world. So if you have to access a hosted application, you have to actually pay for that application, completely for that application. So then came in the cloud model, where all the services are available on the cloud, and whoever wants it can go and pick it up using a model which is called a subscription. You just pay for that particular service. Within the next second, you will get access to the application. So all these things now, for getting us into an era where everything is available instantaneously to you, whether you want a particular service, or whether you want a particular product, or whether you want a particular application, or you want an application, whether you want an operating system to be installed on your computer. Everything is available on the internet for you to go download, pay, and then start using those services. if you really see, these physical, the attributes what I talked about, right? The physical attribute and delivery attributes of the IT, both of them go hand in hand. For example, there is the reason, why we are able to package so much of applications onto the mobile is because of the availability of the cloud. So without cloud, there is no mobile, because all the mobile applications for the data where it goes is to the cloud, whether it is for the storage or whether it is for even for computation, whether it is even for database retrieval. So it only goes to the cloud. So cloud is nothing but an entity where your storage, your computing power, as well as whatever you need extra from other places, are aggregated into one place, which is completely out of you and your physical office or facilities. So that is what is cloud is all about. And these technologies, even though different attributes we talked about, desktops became mobile and first generation language became RAD and waterfall model became agile. Even though we are talking about all these evolutions, actually these evolutions went hand in hand with each other, where you would have seen, all the hardware manufacturers working closely with software people, and all those hardware and software people working closely with mathematicians, physicians, and all those people, to make these applications available. So this is the complete evolving nature of IT that happened in the last 30-35 years, and this will continue. That's why you see the dots here. Maybe, after 5 years, if you take this slide, you would have some other things to go and fill it up there with. Any doubts till now? Shamla, madam, how much more time I have?
Students, you have anything to ask? Sir, maybe we can have it after the session, sir. Like once you finish.
We can have the questions after the sessions. That's fine with me. And how much more time I have, sir?
Like you can continue, sir. Like.
Okay, thank you. So let me take that flexibility. Yeah. So let us talk about the evolutions of IT domain. Let me first talk about the infrastructure. There was no sharing. The whole infrastructure, was dedicated those days. There was no sharing. If you have a particular computer, only you can use it. Because there was. Any questions, please?
Sir, you can continue, sir. You wanted to know the time, so.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Yes.
So, in terms of infrastructure, those days, when we were using the desktops, only one person can use the desktop, and during that time, no one else can use it. So there was no concept of sharing. So if there is one computer, it can be used only by one person. It was only one-to-one relationship that used to happen between the users and the computers those days. And then slowly the sharing started coming into place with the advent of local area networks, where some of the machines were moved into a specific space called labs. So they used to call it as test labs or development labs. So the machines were moved into a place, and then using the local area network or terminals, other people used to access those machines. So the infrastructure evolved mainly because of the concept of sharing. And then, those test labs, used to have multiple computers. Then managing those machines became very difficult. So they try to put in set of processes and methods and the tools along with it. And all those things consolidated, all those tools and machines in a consolidated form became the data center. So much before the data center evolved, there were some technologies like local area networks, which helped us to move towards that line. So the consolidation of the data center also helped in making sure all the people need not have separate computers. They can also have terminals by which they can start accessing the applications. So consolidation helped in terms of sharing the computing power as well as the storage, and even that became difficult because even though there was good amount of sharing, one particular instance of an application can be used by one user, not multiple users. So people wanted to have their own computers, their own application, their own stack, and that's where the virtualization came into the picture. Virtualization is nothing but taking your physical computer and making it look like there are multiple computers so that multiple people can use it. So the virtualization technology helped us to give a perception to all the people, saying that everyone has a separate computer, everyone has a separate stack, so that they can independently go and do their work. So in virtualization, what happens is there will be one physical computer, which will be virtualized to show that there are multiple machines that are available, and each virtual entity can be independently taken by the users, and then they can use it. So virtualization in the operating system came first. Then today in this world today, we have virtualization of applications, which also can get replicated. Then virtualization yielded infrastructure as a platform, and these things in infrastructure as well as the platform are available as a service. What do you mean by as a service is, whenever you need a particular computing platform or a particular storage platform, you can go and request for it, and they're available to you as and when you want it. So as a service means, I can take only the operating system and give to somebody, like, you have this machine with this operating system available for you, and you can go and start using it. So as a service enabled us to provide whatever the outcome of the virtualization into the multiple users so that they can all share it. And once those things are available as a service, which were still sitting on the data center, then people thought, why we have to manage all those resources by ourselves? Let us give to somebody, let us consolidate it and give to somebody outside who can manage all those things. That's where the concept of cloud came into the picture. Cloud actually does not mean your storage and the data center is actually sitting on the heaven. It only means that it is centrally being available in some corner of the world which you don't even know. Since you don't even know where it is, that's why you named it as a cloud, because cloud has no location specified for it. So, this is how the infrastructure has evolved over the 35 years. And physical access medium, we already talked about. The process delivery model, we already talked about. Let us go into the fourth parameter, which is the customer payment model. In 80s and 90s, if at all I wanted to have my program running, even though it may be a simple program, okay, what I need to do is I have to pay for the computer, then I have to pay for the operating system, and then I have to use both the computer and the operating system to write my programs that can be delivered to only a particular customer. So each customer need to have their own machines, their own operating system, and they have to purchase their own applications for them to do their business. So that was involving a large capex, because they have to physically go and buy all these things and then make it available for their own organization. So it involved a large capex, and capex means capital expenditure. That means you have to really spend for all those things and then own it and keep it in your own location. And that was very expensive for the organizations. So to get anything started, they have to go purchase all these things. By the time computerization happens in a particular organization, it used to take 10 to 15 years. Okay, so those were the days when large capex were involved. Then came optimized capex and opex. Okay, where the customers used to pay for their hardware, pay for their operating system, whereas they used to get the hosted services from the applications which are hosted in the internet. So that enabled pay only for the machines but not pay for the applications. So that gave you the mixed capex and opex model, where your capital expenditure of giving everything upfront was high, and then your operating expenditures were low, because the applications were shared between multiple companies, but the hardware was shared only by a particular company because there was no virtualization. Okay, so there was internet, but there was no virtualization. So that was the period where optimized capex and opex came into the picture. Then in today's world, we have more OpEx and less CapEx. Where, to explain all these concepts, maybe let me take a simple example, because, if I start using all the jargons, it becomes difficult for you to understand. So just think about, you want to go from one place to another place, and that is not covered by the bus or train network. The only other option available for you those days was, not even those days, the taxis won't even come out of the cities. So for the rich people those days, the only option was to buy a car, get a driver, and then go from one place to, put petrol, pay for the insurance, and go from one place to another. Then came in the optimized CapEx and OpEx model, where you can go and rent out your car, but still pay for your petrol, still pay for other things like insurance, and then you take that car and go from one place to another place. Today, we have more OpEx and less, in fact, we have complete OpEx also available on the cars, right? You just pay for the distance, and there will be a car which will come from either Uber or Ola. It will come pick you up, it will drop you in whichever place you want. So that is the concept of, for no CapEx and, full OpEx. So which means you are only paying for the use. It is also called pay per use. You only pay for the kind of usage you had, which can be, which can be based on volumetric things, like it could be either based on kilometers or hours. You can today, you can hire a taxi based on, number of hours. You can take a taxi for 4 hours, or you can take a taxi for 100 kilometers or 200 kilometers. So those are all what is called, for combination of OpEx and CapEx models, where your capital expenditure is completely avoided in the current world because of this payment model evolving from large CapEx to combination of OpEx and CapEx models. So these are the evolutions that happen on IT domain. So this volumetric model also helped us to evolve the kind of services that are provided from the cloud. So all these dimensions, what I am talking about, are interdependent with each other. If you're talking about physical medium, the reason why mobile became so thin and so small is because of other technologies that happen in the other side of the attributes, which I talked about in the IT domain. Okay, let us quickly talk about cloud as a synergizing platform. What is cloud and why it is different? Correct? Cloud is a platform on which all the people sit on one particular thing, and all of them use only one entity. Correct? So the developer, the tester, the customer, the users are all sitting on one entity, which is called, there are multiple words to it today. You can call it as containers, you can call it as cloud. You can also, there are multiple categories of the clouds which are available, which are called private cloud, public cloud, community cloud, or hybrid cloud. So basically, cloud is nothing but you are removing all your CapEx, whether it is with respect to your computing power, the CPU, or whether it is with respect to your storage, whether it is with respect to even your other tiers, where you are accessing your database and things like that. Everything is available, not in your office, but somewhere else, which you don't even know. So that is what is called cloud. So the cloud is a unifying platform where all the people use the same entity, so that all the confusions can be avoided. For example, those days, the good number of defects that used to happen in the IT industry was everything used to work in the developer's desk, but it never used to work in the customer desk. That is because the developer was using a different setup, and customer was using different setup, whether it is with respect to hardware, or whether it is with respect to operating system, or whether it is with respect to the versions of your middleware like web server or app server, or it is with respect to the database you used. So all of them were different, because of which multiple defects that came into the picture. So all these people, were confused why those problems came, and they tried to resolve it. All those problems are gone away in the world of cloud, because what you have is an unifying platform. And that is also what is called a synergizing platform, because even all the communication and coordination used to happen through the cloud. The best example is the webinar what we are having today, where all of us are using a single tool, and we are all connected, even though we are sitting at multiple places. Okay, so basically cloud, what it gives is a unified environment where you have zero footprint. Zero footprint means there is no capex. So you just need your mobile device to access a service that is available somewhere on the cloud. So zero footprint means you are not occupying any space for either for your hardware or software, for application or for anything else. So, and it also helps you to deploy it rapidly. So something that is available in the, something the developer has developed, he can immediately put it onto the cloud. The moment he makes it available on the cloud, the tester, customers, and users can start using it momentarily. That is what is called rapid deployment. It happens in seconds, and the global teams can access it with, all of them will have the same access time. Those days in the data center, what we used to have is a server used to sit in India, and some other customers used to sit in US, and there was a delay involved. Even for login, it used to take 5 minutes. So the rapid deployment also helps you to access those services, which is on the cloud in a matter of milliseconds. So because that is being available in a matter of milliseconds, the global teams can work together using the same set of resources. And it also means elasticity. The kind of computing power you want, the kind of storage power you want on the cloud is something which is elastic. So today, if you want 4 CPU machine to run your program, you go and ask for 4 CPU to the vendor of the cloud, and he will make 4 CPUs available to you. And tomorrow, immediately, you think that number of customers have reduced for you, and you want to have only two CPUs, not 4 CPUs. Then you can go and request the service provider, and that person will reduce it to 2 CPUs. So all that can be done without bringing down your application. So that is what is called elasticity. Elasticity does not mean only to scale up, but also it is to contract. So elasticity helps you to pay only for the number of CPUs you use, pay only for the amount of storage you use, and things like that. They are all available as part of your cloud. So we talked about volumetric model, right? Using the car example. So you pay only for the kilometers, or you pay only for the hours that you use. That is also available in the computer world here in terms of your storage power or your computing power. Okay, and also whatever you pay is only for the utilization. Whatever you have used on the cloud, only for that you pay today, not for your computer separately, not for your licensing separately, and things like that. So that also helps you to bring down your upfront investment in terms of starting a company today. That's why you see every day in India as well as around the world, many startups are coming in on the IT industry. All this is because of the cloud and the benefits of the cloud. Okay, so let me touch upon mobile. Mobile is something in which you people know better than me, because everyone has mobile in their hands. But the striking fact about the mobile is there are 6.8 billion people on the planet who use the mobile. But if you actually compare it with a set of people who have the toothbrush, okay, if you have 4 billion people, who are using the mobile phone, there is only 3.5 billion people who have actually the toothbrush. So even those people who can't afford to the toothbrush, or who don't want to use the toothbrush, are still using their mobile phone. So that way, the mobile phone became the most important belonging to somebody. So, the first thing that whenever I get up, the first thing I look at is my mobile. So the mobile became, mobile is the only aspect in the world which stays with you 24/7. So everything else is used only, for part of the day, but this is something which is used 24/7. So, so mobile is very, very pervasive that way. And, more than 80% of the people around the world use mobile phones, and only, 3.5 billion of those people are even using the toothbrush, which we call it as a first instrument that is used on a particular day. Okay, let me come to, okay, I'm not a physics student. I'm not an expert in physics, but these are all some of the aspects of physics which I know, has tremendously helped the IT industry. So I want to talk about it, for going through my 31 years of experience in the industry, and also 6 years of my experience studying computer science. Physics of spinning disks, the volume of data that can be retrieved from your hard disk, and the speed at which it can be retrieved, okay, are interrelated. So if you want to get the data faster, the only way is to increase the speed of the drive at which it is running. So, you would have seen it already in your desktop or laptop. Whenever you are copying a big file, you used to get, apart from the fan noise, that comes to cool down your board. The moment you start copying a file, you will hear a humming noise coming from your disk, because that actually means the speed of the RPM of your disk drive has been increased from one RPM to another RPM. That's what it means. So whenever you hear a humming noise, it means the disk is operating at the highest RPM level. So the volume of data that can be retrieved is actually directed by the speed, which means there's a big physics involvement in every hard disk. Okay, and I will also tell you one more thing. If the speed at which the disk drive is rotating, if the requirement is 7,200, but it is operating at 7,199, there is a big chance that the data can be corrupted. Because whenever the data is stored in bits and bytes into the disk, okay, it automatically assumes that the disk is rotating at a constant speed. Okay, so a small problem in physics will cause all the data to disappear in this world. So that is the importance of physics in the hard disk today. So there is also a topic of dynamic physics, where you have the choices. Today you go and see all the hard disks. They are available to operate at multiple RPMs at the same time. Okay, depending on the amount of data that is requested from the disk, it can automatically go and select the speed so that the data can be retrieved and given to the user in a very quick time. Okay, so this is the dynamic physics that is involved in in calculating the correct RPM needed depending on the mass of data that is going to be retrieved. Okay, this is the physics of spinning disks. Let us talk about speed of light. The speed of light, we only studied about speed of light. All of us know what is the speed of light, but we don't even know what is the speed of darkness. And this is one parameter where the computer science professionals like me did not really understand the significance of the speed of light, even though we have been using it on a daily basis. If you really look at the long distance communication today, to avoid the latency and to avoid the delay of data from one place to another place, what we use today is something called optical fibers. It actually uses the speed of light as a mechanism by which the data is communicated through pulses in the light, where the data is where the data is transferred from one place to another place. So optical fiber operates on the speed of light, which is an invention by physics. And you really look at the hardware and look at your computer. You open and look at your computer. There are two things you see. One is a heat sink. Other one is a small fan. So that the heat that is generated by the computing power, the heat that is generated by the storage devices, can be reduced, because whenever there is more heat, it impacts your conductivity. Whenever it impacts conductivity, it becomes an electricity problem, and data cannot go from one place to another, and computation cannot happen at the same speed in the CPU. So heat and cooling is a very, very, very important aspect for all the computers to work. And and the technology of the heat sink and the AC are all provided by the computer, for the computer science by physics. So that is on the heat and cooling side of it. And more importantly, something which I am fascinated about is a quantum physics. A quantum computer, is a computer which comes from a quantum mechanics, which is very close to physics, and it can perform computations more and more efficiently. And there are only very, very, very few quantum computers that are available in the world. Does anyone know what is the cost of a quantum computer? There is one quantum computer which is with Google. Not many companies have it. The cost of one quantum computer is $30 million. Okay, so why someone has to invest in a $30 million into a quantum computer? The reason is here below. Okay, quantum computer does not use binary bits. It uses something called qubits. If you really look at the binary bits, the 4 bits can represent 2 to the power 4, which is 16 values. But that 4 bits together can only represent 1 out of 16 values, and it can, it cannot store all the 16 values into the computer. Correct? So it can only store 1 out of those 16 values if you have 4 bits. Correct? Whereas there is something called qubits, which is used in the quantum computer. It can hold all this. Not only it can represent 1 out of 4, 1 out of 16 values, but it can also simultaneously store all those 16 values into the computer. So qubits is the next invention, which is going to be used in terms of how you store and retrieve the data, and how you even process the data. Right? So the qubits is going to be the last 30 years we lived with bits and bytes. So all that is going to change in the quantum computer world. The next one is the speed at which the quantum computer works is quantum computer. To give you just one example, there are multiple examples. To just give you one example, if you have any floating point operations, it can be multiplication or addition or subtraction or whatever it could be using the floating point. Okay, quantum computer can solve 10 teraflops of floating point operations compared to only gigaflops of operation on a normal computer, which is called servers. Okay, so it is, do you know the difference between trillion and billion? How many billions is trillions, So that is the kind of, exponential growth we are going to have in terms of computing power, once quantum computers come into the world. Today, quantum computers are not very, very popular, not because of its applications. Today, today a lot of applications run on supercomputers, which are not quantum computers. That itself provides you 1,000 times more processing power. But look at quantum computers; it can give billion times processing power what you see with some other supercomputers today. So the quantum physics is the brain behind it, which made the quantum computers available. So there are quantum computers, and there are a lot of theory about quantum computers that are available on the web. I would encourage you to go and read about them. So I started reading about it only a few days before. Quantum changes, isn't it, in the last 35 years? So, to give you a few more pointers of where computer science and physics go together, astrophysics is one area. If you go and see, what kind of people SpaceX as a company is hiring, which pays you one of the best salaries in the world, for the subjects are astrophysics and computer science. So SpaceX hires people, who knows either astrophysics or computer science or the combinations. Okay, the speed and velocity play a major role in electric cars. Today, the biggest problem of electric cars being implemented in any country is because it lacks in speed as well as in the velocity. So that is a topic which the physics students have to solve to make it a viable product outside. And high energy physics, neural networks. We talked about neural networks where physics was involved. So these are all some other subjects where things would be of lot of use in combining the computer science and physics here. And combination of maths is even more powerful than a combination of physics and computer science, which is driving the current technology, which is called deep learning. So we talked about it already. And I can keep on giving a lot of examples there, whether it is partial differential equation or algebraic equations and things like all those models what I talked about in the artificial intelligence are nothing but those mathematical models and physics models coming together and solving a problem for a computer. Correct? So whether it is for as old as Lagrange mechanics or for as new as for neural networks, physics and computer science combination along with mathematics play a major role. Okay, so getting into the future, we talked about past, we talked about the present. Getting into the future, I don't have many things to predict. So I can only give my perspectives of what I am going to change, what is going to change for me, and what I am going to change for being alive in this industry. Correct? So what are my thoughts? I want to just give those thoughts in single or two lines so that we can go and study further and then do more thinking about it. To take that, let me first take the example of schools. What will happen to computer science? I want to talk about it last before talking about other related places. So what may happen to schools in 5 to 10 years? If you look at the picture here, it's a conversation between a cat and a baby. Okay, so this is the reality, right? As long as a baby starts walking in 2 legs, that baby will be sent to school, or at least admitted in the school, correct? In the name of pre-KGs, correct? So as and when a person is born and become 2 or 3 years, that person is into the school. So a person spends more time in the school rather than at home. And then the moment the schooling is over, that person spends more time at office rather than at home. So all those things are reality, right? So what happens is with the advent of online courses, now schools are becoming less relevant. Okay, so internet learning is becoming more relevant. So where the idea is, let me stay at home and study online. So that is becoming popular, not just because of Corona. This was even available before. So during Corona, only the pervasiveness got increased, but these things were available. Working from home or studying online were already available. Okay, so this is what is happening. Everything will become online, and the purpose of the schools and colleges would become, channelizing your efforts towards, what resources are available on the internet and what kind of value it can provide for you. So the colleges will channelize those efforts rather than making the content available with the college itself. Okay, and what may happen to the organization in 5 to 10 years? Majority of that already has happened. So organization will become virtual. So at least in the last 1 year, we have seen people are not going to the offices and they're all working from home. And offices will become virtual, and that will also drive a community where employees will have a choice of joining any organization in the world. Till now, people in India have been working only for Indian companies which have an office in India, either a branch office where the head office exists some other part of the world, or the office which is built and brought up here in India. So only these 2 types of offices were there in India where the employees were working. But in future, employees will have a choice of working for any organization in the world that do not have local office in your city or in your country or in your continent. So that is what is becoming reality with respect to all the organizations and companies today. So what may happen to doctors in 5 to 10 years? Okay, the primary duty of the doctors will tell you not to take medicines, but to develop immunity by either through vaccines or by taking proper food. Okay, so that is also evolving a paradox in medicine today. Vaccines are available in India, but many of the people don't want to take it because they are worried about side effects. So the only other choice, if you don't want to take vaccine, is to improve the immunity in your body. And that is something which is becoming a theory subject as well as a research subject which is happening among the physicians today. So what may happen to computer science? This is interesting. So the physics, like the principals are said, for computer science is not a main subject. I was not agitated by that statement because that is reality. That is the truth as well. Because physics is the basics, and mathematics is another basic, so physics and mathematics give rise to, for a lot of applications for computer science. The way it happens is something, that is derived out of physics is called computational physics, which uses combination of mathematics and physics. And that is a solution that computer science uses, for bringing out their application, bringing out their inventions and technology. Okay, so computer deals with hardware and software. Physics deals with how do you, if there is a problem, how do you apply solutions to that problem. And mathematics gives you techniques by which a problem can be solved. Either it is by a mathematical equation or by a model. Okay, so these three things go hand in hand. For even when I was talking about data, the evolution of data in the first slide, you really see the evolution of data science into artificial intelligence to deep learning to all those things which are going to come in the future. It is going to revolve around physics, maths, and computer science. So what will happen to computer science is, with the advent of artificial intelligence, where machine can predict things based on repeated use of intelligent data. Okay, machine learning, quantum computing, where abundant amount of computing power is available, abundant amount of storage being available, and neural networks where even animals can behave like humans, and with no code programs where you don't have to go and write a program if you have a mathematical model and procedures and concepts. Okay, then computer science, with all these inventions, where computer science will go? Computer science will go only the way where it is to solve the mathematical formulas and help the physics applications, not anything more. Correct? So that's what is happening. I'm already using some other programs. Today, we do a lot of testing in the organizations where I am dealing with. We don't write the code. The code gets automatically generated by some other tools that we use. So this is already a reality. So to a great extent, it's a reality. We in the data science today, I'm studying data science where I'm talking about mathematical models. So I am brushing up my calculus, I'm brushing up my algebra. So all those things are happening. Correct? So in future, the combination of physics, mathematics, and computer science is going to play a major role. So if there is a student who has a good intersection knowledge of physics, mathematics, and computer science, those are all the students who will have a better career than others. Okay, with that, I open the floor for questions. Okay, here in the question and answers, I would also take the help of other people who are here. We have a gentleman called Satyan here, who studied both physics and computer science, so he can also give his wisdom of thoughts.
Students, you may post your questions in the chat box, or you can raise hand and ask the speaker directly your questions. Saraswati, can you guide them?
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful speech. Now, with your permission, I would like to open the session for questions. Participants can now ask their questions to the speaker. If you have any questions, you can put forth.
Thanks a lot, sir. The talk was really good.
Thank you. It's thanks to you for bringing me here. It's a
sir,
great opportunity. Great
Yes.
opportunity for me to talk to a large set of people, who are coming from physics
Yes.
as well.
Yes. Computer things.
Computer
Come on,
science.
students. Anybody has got any doubts?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for the very interesting lecture, sir. I have a doubt. What is the limit of artificial learning and deep learning things, sir? Like, will they grow up to a point that they will replace humans in everything and they will do all the work and we just sit sedentary at home in the future?
Okay. Not necessarily. So where do we use computers for? Wherever, we don't use computers for everything. The relationship is something, which comes only through humans. That cannot be replaced by computers. Okay. So it is not that a computer is not going to play a major role in terms of replacing the human, but it is going to help. The human in solving some of the problems which are difficult to solve by a small human brain. Correct. So where large amount of computing power is needed, where large amount of logic, the pieces of those logic coming from multiple humans, it will basically help you to aggregate the intelligence that is available in multiple humans rather than from one. So, you would have heard, during your moral story classes, bunch of sticks, is stronger than, a single stick. Correct? So
Yes, sir.
all this artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all those things will help you to bundle those sticks, rather than replacing those sticks by itself. So the individual intelligence has to come from multiple sections of people who study physics, computer science, or mathematics, but the collective wisdom would be available to the machine to solve some of the repetitive problems. If there is a problem which is unique like COVID, obviously human mind is required.
Okay, sir. I have one more question, sir. So what is the time frame in which we can expect quantum computers to be available for the general public? Or
Yeah, so I will give you one example to it before I move on to the next one, right? Those days, computers used to come with 64 kilobytes of RAM, and Bill Gates, whom we all know, Bill Gates that point of time said 64 KB is good enough for all the computer users next to 15 years. Okay, so he thought that 64 KB is enough, and we will get 128 KB only after 15 years. But what happened in reality was 128 KB became available from the hardware vendors the very next year. So today, the cost of quantum computer is $30 million, because of which everyone is saying, it will take years to come. But that is a problem I'm sure, other people will solve. And it is like your electric cars. A lot of people are thinking electric cars will come to India only after 10 years. But you see, already Bangalore, I have seen one electric car running on the road from Tesla. So, any technology, goes beyond your imagination, and internet, is taking us everywhere. And I'm sure, quantum computers will soon become available, maximum 2-3 years.
thank you, sir. Thank you for answering
In fact,
my doubts.
if you don't know, you are already using quantum computer. Some of your social service engines, from Google, uses quantum computer already.
Okay, sir.
So it is not that you are not using, you are already using it through cloud.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
You can go and Google it based on Google quantum computer, and you will get more information about it.
Sure, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions, students?
Sir, sir, you were talking about the advancements in cloud computing and cloud storage, sir.
Yes.
What are the we know about cyber crime, sir? What are the preventive measures we should take against data theft, sir? If like you said, startups are using cloud computing, they should be able to protect their data, no, sir.
Okay. So there are two aspects to it. Data theft, did it happen by technology? As long as greedy people are around, security becomes a problem. So whatever technology I use, as long as I have the door in my house, somebody can break it and then come inside. Correct? So there are two types of security problems. One is the security holes that are created by the programs, by the applications or by the stack, whether it is by your web server, app server, or database. If they are not properly protected, then your data can be seen by somebody who is outside, who can steal it. That is what is called a technology hole. So to close those holes, it is not that only in the cloud environment the security holes are there. Even otherwise, even in the data center, we used to have those problems those days. So it is not unique. So those gaps in technology can be closed the moment we come to know about it. That is one thing. The gaps in human greed, I don't know how to close it. So majority of the data theft, what we are talking about, and blaming it onto the cloud, is not exactly on the technology side itself, because there are some greedy people who have access to the entire data, who are making their own copies of the data and making it available outside, which cannot be prevented whatever technology comes. Data security is a huge subject where security holes can be created by the program, or it can get created by the hardware, or it can get created by the middle tiers that are available, like your app server, web server, or the setup, or it can be even created by your admin team by creating a user and inadvertently giving all the access to that person to access everything. Correct? So it can come from the process side, it can come from the technology side, or it can come from the human side. So the technology side problems on the cloud are getting addressed. Not all of them are addressed yet, but that's a huge subject, So data security is one subject, and cloud security is another subject. There are a lot of people doing research on it still.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sir,
Yes, madam.
I wanted to hear something from you about virtual reality, sir.
Okay, that is a subject which I don't even know, but maybe there are experts here who can answer that question. Shamla, madam, do you know anything about it?
No, sir. It's actually virtual reality.
Okay. So I actually had a slide which said, in every class there will be one scientist who will ask questions out of the box. I found the scientist today.
Sir, I have a question, sir.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
So usually they have this beta testing for every application, like
Correct.
for mobile phone application. So what do they mean by that? What is beta testing?
Okay, so we would have heard in alpha, beta, and gamma, right? So that is a set of words which are used. That is a set of words that are used even in testing world. So alpha testing is some testing which is done by the developers themselves or done by the company themselves. Okay, alpha testing is something that happens. Alpha testing is something that happens inside the place where the program is getting generated. The set of developers and test engineers, they do their own testing. That is called alpha testing or internal testing. Then we have something called customer, right? We deliver the software to the customer and ask the customer to test before the delivery of the product. That is what is called beta testing. So once the product is completely qualified, then we go and give it to the end customer and take the money from the customer. That is what is called gamma testing or gold testing. So, these words are, coming from the other industries, alpha, beta, gamma, and computer science also uses it. So alpha means that is happening inside your premises. Beta means where the customer is helping you in testing. That is called beta testing. And gamma is your final tested product that goes out. So even you can relate it to the vaccine testing that are happening today. Trial 1, trial 2 are beta testing. Now we have passed those trials, and then now it is being, for the vaccinations are being given to the healthcare workers in India. That is what is called gamma. So that is the final product, which is being administered. Correct. So the product went through, for example, all the vaccines went through alpha testing, where the pharmaceutical companies tested within their 4 walls. Then they gave it to the hospitals to do some trials with the help of patients. That trial was called beta testing. Then today, we have the final product, which is getting administered to all the people.
Thank you, sir.